Hi everybody, Dana here again, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. And today, continuing the series on troublesome teammates, whether those are volunteers or other staff that you have to work with, either that are your peers or you supervise, or sometimes even a step or two above you in the agency structure, and kind of how to solve for some archetype personalities. And I go over these archetypes in my webinar, Hold 'em or Fold 'em, how to inspire, fire, or move challenging volunteers. But again, these apply to any kind of troublesome teammate and trying to work something out before taking the drastic step of letting them go or dismissing them from the position. So this week talking about the Grumpasaurus, or the Oscar the Grouch, if you've watched Sesame Street, of that person who is just always very negative, very curt, maybe has very poor communication skills, comes across as rude. And, again, all of these kind of personality types or archetypes are on a spectrum. So it could be that this Grumpasaurus type person who's negative and kind of brings everybody down or is always very critical of things. It could be that they are kind of Oscar the Grouch and that's their core personality, but they have a heart of gold and they're still doing good work and they're not crossing any code of conduct line. So it's like, well, everyone knows that John is Grouch, like that's fine, or Oscar is Grouch. Then there's the end of the spectrum where, they're very clearly crossing the line of code of conduct, abusive behavior, bigotry, bias. It's going beyond constructive criticism or general negativity, and it's really kind of damaging the work or the team dynamic. And for the Grumpasaurus, there's really the best solution is to tell them that they're not doing well in their communication. Is, again, like some of the previous archetypes, have a really honest conversation about communication skills and either steer the entire team towards an in-service communication skills that's based on respect and empathy and compassion and active listening, kind of train everybody to that. I always recommend that. Or steer them towards, hey, if you can't change this behavior, then there's going to be these consequences per the volunteer handbook, the employee handbook, whatever type of role you're dealing with. The other thing about Grumpasaurus is if you have that conversation and really listen to them, they sometimes and can have very good ideas of what's wrong in the systems, what's going wrong in the agency, and they may be coming from a point of frustration as someone who is not jiving either with changes, like there's been kind of maybe challenging change management rollout and they're disagreeing with that. So kind of try to figure out if they're overlapping their Grumpasaurus with the founder syndrome or very entrenched volunteer or very entitled volunteer or the fake expert volunteer that we've covered before in this little Tuesday Tips mini-series. But they may have some real concerns that aren't getting addressed, and it could be about inequity or other fairness or policy problems that are happening in the agency that have a real core of truth to them and need to be solved. And they're to a point of frustration where they're not seeing changes or updates in a good direction, in a positive direction, and that's part of what's making them grumpy. So see if they have any core, truthful, real grievances underneath the grumpiness. And otherwise, you may have to get to a point, if they're crossing lines in code of conduct, to have that accountability conversation and or dismiss them from the role if that's within your power. The other troublesome teammate that can kind of overlap with Grumpasaurus is an archetype that I call rebel without a clue, or rebel without a cause. And that's someone who is just, it's their core personality or their default setting to be very contrarian, to not really respect any other leadership positions, whether that's among volunteers or paid staff who might be in charge of their team or their project or their department. And they're kind of like, you're not the boss of me, you can't tell me what to do. And again, there's a spectrum of that. So if they are having a real grievance against a new policy or a change and you want to talk to them about how they can get on board with it or go along with it or what their problem is, there's that. But most of the time, the kind of rebel without a clue they don't respond to certain micromanagement styles. So this could be something where this just isn't the personality to match your management style or the management style of whoever is their direct supervisor, if you have a structure like that. So maybe check amongst yourselves and check amongst the structures of how teams are led, of how people are supervised. And sometimes a Grumpasaurus or a rebel without a clue is just having a beef with the person that they have to work with the most, or they don't respect the person that is their supervisor because of a variety of reasons, whether that is just a personality and communication style conflict, or if it's getting into one or the other of the people in the beef having a real bigotry or a bias against the other person for something that they can't change. So again, kind of investigating and checking into and having two-way conversations with folks who are either the Grumpasaurus, perpetually negative, grouchy, or the rebel without a clue who just is kind of pushing back against everything. It can range to they're really crossing a line, or the rebel without a clue doesn't want to work in this particular team anymore. Ideally, you can inspire a Grumpasaurus or a rebel without a clue to either change their behavior or shift to a role that or a team that's a better fit, that goes along more with what their interests are, what their concerns are, and maybe everyone on that team has a gruff communication style and they don't mind it with each other, so kind of some personality shuffling. But again, don't be afraid to dismiss or fire someone from their role if that's within your power, if they're really crossing a line. And again, ideally, your agency does have a very clear written code of conduct as a volunteer handbook or manual and as an employee handbook or manual, where the accountability and the consequences are fair and the same whether someone is paid or unpaid in their role. So I hope you've enjoyed this kind of Troublesome Teammates little mini series of Tuesday tips, and feel free to get in touch with me if you're having any personnel issues or just want to dig deeper into strategic volunteer engagement. I've got much more information below, and I'll link to some other videos that are helpful in this series for you right up in the corner. We'll see you next time. Thanks.